Have I plugged in my power source? I have, yeah. Okay, so computer won't
We're,
die.
we're
Okay.
all good to go. So welcome Ben to talk about his new book, his 14th novel, first foray into the 12th century with Lionheart, which is out in the 28th. Ben, tell us a wee bit about Lionheart and how you came to be writing 12th century rather than your normal era.
Okay, well, first of all, thanks, Ruadh, for inviting me for a chat. It's great to have a talk. Great to see you. Yeah, this is my 14th novel. Scary as that, or sort of that milestone. It's kind of amazing how fast that's come around. Roman book for many years. Obviously, the people who do know me, they know me for Roman novels, and that's because I've written 13 of them. And the reason for that is not because I'm totally obsessed by just Roman history. It's because the books have done well, and publishers are quite conservative beasts in some regard. So they tend to say, you know, if something's selling well, why don't you write another one along those lines? And so the Eagles of Rome trilogy, which was 2 series ago, that should have been, quote unquote, a 100 Years' War series. And I had the plot outlines. I mean, I'd actually had a contract for a 100 Years' War series. And just before I came to start writing the first book, I was in London having a meeting with publishers, and they sat down and, you know, nice lunch and all that. And then the editor and the head of sales turned around and said, you know, are you really, you know, stuck on this idea of a 100 Years' War trilogy? And I said, well, you know, I've got the whole plot outline and blah blah blah, and I'm pretty revved up to go. Why? And the answer was that they thought it wouldn't sell like a Roman series. And so I sat there and I thought about it. Now, you know, I've never been I'm an artist, I have to do what I want. I mean, I'm quite down to earth with the reason for my books. Although I love history, my publisher pays for my mortgage, and it pays for the groceries and to feed the kids. Like, not to put too fine a point on it. So if the head editor and head of sales for the whole company were sitting there saying they thought I should write a Roman series rather than another period, I just shrugged my shoulders and said, I'll write another Roman series. They said, have you got an idea? I went, yeah, here's this. You know, Teutoburg Forest, a very famous defeat for Rome, a major sort of turning point in Rome's imperial expansion, and away I went. And then I changed publisher 2016, and I offered them a 3-book deal, and that was for 3 books about the Roman invasion of Macedon, which is the Clash of Empires duology, as many people may know. It's not 3 books. And the reason for that is because they said, we'd like you to write 2 books about that, and we want you to write a non-Roman book. And it was like that thing of, you know, the caged animal. You open the cage and it's never been outside, and it doesn't want to get outside the cage. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'd thought about this for so many years, and now they were actually making it a prerequisite of my new contract that I should write a non-Roman book. And I went, okay, but, you know, obviously I seized the opportunity. And so, sorry, I'm very aware I'm just rattling on here. Have you got
perfect.
No, okay. And so, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's very interesting to have come up with the publisher to have suggested something beyond the bounds of where you'd been to that point. I think that's really forward thinking. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it was a really nice thing because you know, my previous publishers, Random House, they were very good to me. They gave me my first book deal. They published 11 novels. They treated me really well, and I'll always respect them for that. But this new publisher, Orion, they wanted me to do something different. They wanted to sort of stretch me a bit. And it wasn't at that time, but it was not long after. I was talking with Katie Espiner. She edited Giles Christian's first few novels, and she's sort of whiz kid, so she's now sort of a CEO of one of the imprints of Orion. So she doesn't edit anymore because, you know, Giles just raved about her, and I was thinking, oh, when I move, maybe she would edit my books. And anyway, I mean, I now have a brilliant editor; it's all fine. But I'm having, you know, a meeting with her and other people there, and she said to me, "Do you know why Bernard Cornwell took a break from sharp novels and started writing non-Roman, or sorry, not Roman, non-sharp novels?" And I said, oh, I have no idea. And she said, well, I was on the editorial team when he, when he made that change. And the reason was he was getting bored with Sharp. And she looked at me and she said, are you getting bored with Rome? She said, I know you're not doing one series, but you've written 13 words, but I really would like to do another time period. And she said, well, there you are. And then she said, and when you've written a few books in a non-Roman time period, would you like to go back to Rome? And I went, yeah. And she said, great. Why don't you do that then? So it was like, she actually said, we're looking out for your long-term writing career. We want you to be able to move around and do what you want. And I was going, oh my God, like no one said this to me ever. So that was where it came from. So there were there were lots of ideas batted around, but when I suggested Lionheart, their eyes just lit up. So, yeah.
Perfect. And good segue into the first question. It's, I mean, even the name, the title, Lionheart, it just throws you into a different sort of immediate into that sort of swords and castles landscape. Is that pretty much what drew you to Lionheart, the 12th century?
Yes, I mean, I've had a big interest, and for those who don't know, I'm fascinated by pretty much any period of history. I'll happily, go and look at an Egyptian museum or medieval castle or a World War One battlefield, something to do with World War Two, or literally any historical period is fascinating to me. But yeah, Lionheart. I first read about him. There's a children's author, or was a children's author, called Ronald Welch. I don't know whether you've ever heard of him. He wrote a loosely linked series from, I think the earliest one was Night Crusader, which is the one I'm going to mention. And then he had a family member of that guy in the original book, sort of a grandson and a great-grandson and a great-great-grandnephew. And each book was a different time period, but a story all the way down to the 16 and 1700s. And I only ever had about 4 or 5 of them, but they were fantastic. And I reread Night Crusader just a couple of months ago. It's about 1187, the Battle of Hattin, which is when the Christian army of the Kingdom of Jerusalem was decisively defeated by Saladin, and that led to the fall of Jerusalem, which led to Richard's crusade. And that was the scene, this scene where I first met Richard when I was probably only about 11 or 12 years old. This warrior king who was 6'3", with a massive beard and red gold hair, who did these mad things that just nobody could beat him, nobody could kill him. And yeah, when I sort of researched it, I just thought, I'm sure you're the same. Yeah. You just read these thick books and go, I want to put this in a book. This is so exciting. Oh, I don't have to make this up.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. And is that image of Richard, has it changed a little bit in your story, or is it still that sort of redhead, Paul O'Connell type charging around, or is it slightly different?
Paul O'Connell with hair.
1990s Paul O'Connell.
Yeah, it has changed. It has to, because I was just saying before we started the interview, I've written over 100,000 words of the second book, which is the Crusade. It's called Crusade, and it's set in mostly, on his journey through Sicily and then Cyprus and Israel today. And yeah, my view of him has changed, because I've now written nearly 2 books about him, and this book, the first book, he's in it, but he's not in it. He's in nearly all of it, but not all of it. It's because you've got to build the story of the main character, who's actually an Irishman, who becomes his loyal follower. Whereas the second book, he's there in pretty much every scene, and the historical texts that survive are just a total joy. So I've spent 13 novels reading Roman texts, which sometimes you've got one line for a whole war, or if you're lucky, a paragraph. And if you've got more than 2 pages about any particular scene, it's like manna from heaven. But again, as I'm sure you know, because this is your field, the 12th century, there are no less than 5 first-hand contemporary accounts of the Third Crusade that survive in the complete state. They're whole books. And they're just, I mean, I'm just reading them. Literally, they're open on my desk every day, and I'm just reading them, going, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God! I've got to put this in. I've got to put this in." And you've got the curses and the way they refer to the Saracens and the prayers, and it's just gold
Gold mine.
for yeah, a complete gold mine. And I mean, I'm having to be ruthless and say I can't put this in, and I can't, but I just want to pack in another little juicy detail. It's so much fun. The first book, which I should be talking about, it was a little more problematic because we don't know so much about Richard's early life. There are more holes in the historical text. So we know when he was born, and we know a little bit about his childhood, and then we know a little bit about when he was 13 or 14 and he was made Duke of Aquitaine. And then you have sort of a year or two here and a year there where you know nothing at all. So I had to make the decision, when do I open the book? Because it's very frustrating trying to fit historical events into a book when you've got massive holes here and there. Because you know you can do it obviously, but the book could be the size of Lord of the Rings. So I had the unfortunate decision to make, and I decided to start in 1179 because that was 10 years after. I was looking for the age of me. He was about 22 then, and I wanted the main protagonist, well, joint main protagonist, Ferdia, who's an Irishman, to be about the same age or just a little bit younger. And the Normans, as many people will know, invaded Ireland in 1169. So this was 10 years after the Norman invasion, when they had subjugated the sort of the southeast and the eastern coast up nearly as far as Northern Ireland. And that's where I decided I didn't know where to make the hero from. And I called him Ferdia, which is actually my son's name, which is a very rare Irish name. And then I thought, oh, well, I might as well make him from the same county I'm from. And then I remembered there's a little town called Carlingford, not so far, well, near in the same county as I'm from, with a castle in it, and it's called King John's Castle. And it was actually built by bad King John. I went, right, okay. So there's a thing for the third book, or the fourth book. So I made him from Carlingford.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so it was a huge enjoyment to write an Irishman because Harry Sidebottom's got a Roman Irishman, a Roman Englishman, and a Roman Scotsman. It's like the joke, and I never did that. I always chickened out of it. But finally, I thought I could justify having an Irishman in a book because it isn't too much of a stretch to have a hostage sent over to Wales, to where Strongbow's from, which is Chepstow Castle, and then you know, okay, you've got to bend it a bit, but then he could meet Richard, and the rest was history, as they say, or not. That's the fictional thing, but yeah.
But you know, I have to have a dash of fiction in there. But it's a very interesting time. Obviously, it's my period and my place, I suppose. But you know, when you get to write about the place you're from, you know, we're talking County Louth, Carlingford Lough. You must have been pretty happy to pick up the tale in a very turbulent time for that part of the world as well.
Indeed, and you know, I wanted, you know, the minute I was into it, I wanted to write the story of the Northern invasion and what happened, and you know, the struggles for the kingship and all that, and I wanted to have Strongbow in it, and that's as I'm sure you know as well, you know, when you're writing a book, you've got to keep your focus, because if you sort of, it's like looking in a shop window, if you're a toy shop, if you're a kid, and you go, I want that, and I want that, and I want that in my story, and you can't put it all in. So, you know, there's mention of Strongbow and there's mention of the struggles in Ireland, but sadly, for the you know, if you're interested in that, it's literally passing interest because it's just the first chapter, the sort of background to the main character, and then he's actually in Wales. It opens when he arrives in Wales at Chepstow Castle, which I only visited for the first time about a year and a half ago. It's only 40 miles from where I live, and I'm embarrassed to say, I suppose I'd always gone to Roman ruins, but if any of you live within 100 miles or more of Chepstow Castle in South Wales, very close to the river crossing from Bristol and not far from Cardiff, it's a magnificent ruin. And the original walls of the Norman keep that were built before Richard, by the original Normans that arrived, are still there, but also the additions built by William Marshall and and the men who came after him right up until the 1300s, this massive, long, narrow castle along a ridge overlooking a river. It's a great location to visit.
And a great place setting for a story. Again, where do we find Richard at the start in 1179? What's he up to? He's a young man, but where is he in life?
He was still the Duke of Aquitaine. So his father, Henry II, ruled a vast realm. So Scotland was not part of it, but pretty much all of modern day England, half of Wales-ish, because the Welsh still didn't like the English and were still fighting. The bit of Ireland he was the king of Ireland, even though he hadn't really he'd been there only once. But his main area of his realm was actually France. So a surprise to some people that I'd say I've never worked it out with Google or percentages, but on the maps anyway, he ruled about 3/4 of modern day France. The King of France had a tiny realm which was sort of around Paris and a little bit to the south, but Normandy and Brittany and Aquitaine, which is that whole area down the west coast and deep inland, was his. And Aquitaine had come from the dowry of his wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most famous women in medieval history. And Richard was the ruler of it. And he'd been fighting there because the Aquitanian nobles didn't like having a king. They were very troublesome. He'd been fighting them on and off for years. So from the age of about 16 or 17, he was leading his own armies there. Daddy was not there. You think of a 16 or 17-year-old now, or even an 18-year-old joining the army, but this was a guy leading an army. And 1179, he'd spent a couple of years doing the most amazing sieges. So wars back then consisted often of sieges and standoffs. Nobody wanted as I'm sure you know this as well, nobody wanted a full-out battle, because if the leader, i.e. the king or the Duke of Aquitaine, was killed, you lost your realm and you were dead. So, but he was a master at siegecraft, and that's what it opens when he comes to Wales looking for men, because they constantly needed archers and men at arms and so on, and that's how the hero meets him when he comes to Chepstow, which is fiction, but I did it where there's a hole in the historical narrative. We don't know where he was, so you can't prove me wrong. So yeah.
That goes. And Richard's character, it's somebody, I remember I'm reading some point ago that someone called him yes and no because he just kept people, playing people off against each other. Is that something that comes into it a bit? Is his character a bit kind of, how do you paint him? How's Ben Kane's Lionheart?
Well, his nickname Océnon, which is the Occitan language from the south of France, north of Spain, was my understanding of it. So, but I'm sure there are many interpretations. Was that it was because he was so curt that if you asked him a question, he'd just say yes or no. He wouldn't elaborate. So, but at the same time, we know he was fluent in several languages. He wrote poetry. And although he was, his main love was war, he really did live to fight. He was also a very good at siege warfare, and he was very loyal. So even though his father, he had rebelled against his father, but then been taken back along with his brothers. When the brothers then rose again against Henry II, he remained loyal to the father. And even when his elder brother died and the father Henry II refused to name him as heir, even though Richard was now the oldest son, he did remain loyal to him until near the end. So he was fiercely loyal, which is a characteristic I really like. So I have him like that, and I have him as sometimes very arrogant and overbearing, and he does something and you think that, through the eyes of the Irish guy, should you really do that? But he doesn't. He tries to tell him once or twice and nearly gets his head bitten off. But I have Richard as a man who will have a temper like a thunderstorm, and then it's gone, and then he'll. So there's also the historical question of was he gay or was he not gay? And I mean, in my mind, the way that came about was just bad history. Historians of the 19th century looked at references to him sleeping in the same bed as the French king and went, oh, well, he's clearly gay. And what they didn't realize or care to bother looking into was the fact that it was normal if you were a guest of some other high-ranking noble, it was completely normal to get them to sleep in the same bed.
Yeah.
And this was not a sexual thing. And there's sort of further evidence of that is there's actually a depiction in a medieval church in England of two men in a bed. And homosexuality was unbelievably unacceptable back then. So it wouldn't have been pictured on a stained glass window unless this was something acceptable and also non-sexual. And so, the people have said the fact that he didn't have children with his wife, or he may have had one son as well, a bastard son.
Yeah.
But why didn't he have more of them? Well, maybe just like fighting. And also, there have been arguments about the two times he sort of confessed, made a really big confession about the sins that he had done, and one of them that I had seen, it's in Sicily, where he actually stripped himself naked and lay down in front of the altar to confess, and all the 19th century historians queued up to go, well, he must have been confessing that he was gay.
You just wouldn't strip naked unless it was that.
Well, other people did that too. His brother Henry, who was also called Henry, the young king, when he was dying, he had himself stripped naked and dragged around his bed to show he was sorry to God for what he'd done. So, so I mean, I have that scene, but I had him fornicating with a pretty half Arab, half Sicilian girl, and he when he took a notion, he went at it in a big way, and then he thought, oh, this isn't very kingly. So, and what else? Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to ask about his relationship with his father. Is obviously quite, tempestuous. His mother was obviously a big part of his life, far more so it seems than his brothers. I mean, is she playing a role in your story?
Yeah, I mean, my editor was really keen that I would have Eleanor in as a big character, and because she's such a standout woman. There are so few women from antiquity that we know anything about, and we know quite a lot about her. But the really annoying thing was I was all gung-ho to do that, and then when my research, because I didn't know a huge amount about Eleanor, was that so she basically encouraged Richard and two of the brothers to rebel against Henry in the 1170s. And when that was ended, Henry II forgave his sons, but he locked up Eleanor, and he locked her up for about 15 years. So I thought, well, how can I have her? And she was mostly kept under house arrest in England. It was only in the 1180s when Henry II used to bring her over to France, and she was given some more freedom. So I thought, I can't have Richard going over to England every month,
weekend.
Every weekend on an EasyJet flight to see his mum. And it struck me as too artificial to have letters. I mean, they did write to each other, but not really very much, I don't think. And so I just took the decision that, unfortunate as it was, she would appear, but only occasionally. She's actually in the second book more because she, as you probably know, she accompanied Richard's bride. He couldn't get married before he went on crusade because he was still promised to the sister of Philip, the King of France, who he'd been engaged to for 21 years and managed to keep her on the long finger. The poor girl.
I think there's a bit more to it, but I won't.
Otherwise, there was, yeah, of course, yeah. But anyway, when his bride did come, she was the daughter of a minor Spanish king. His mother accompanied her when she was 73, I think. It was just for all the way from northern Spain to Sicily on her, just with a few retainers, and then she went up. She saw her son for 3 days, and then went back. And she'd been on crusade before herself as well. So, so she's actually in the second book a bit more.
I think that's a character that you couldn't leave out, even if you wanted to. It seems that she was going to force her way in whatever you're going to write about that time. Obviously, Eleanor of Aquitaine, that landscape you probably know as well as anywhere, because you've spent quite a bit of time traveling around there with your Hannibal tales and things. Similar country, Aquitaine, and the sort of the southern part. I mean, does that landscape play a big role in the story? Is Aquitaine sort of a central part to it?
Yes, it's got quite a lot of the book is set in that area, the first book. And I actually saw more of it last summer when we went on a family holiday. I booked us a gîte in the Limousin, which funnily enough is in the middle of the Aquitaine, and funnily enough was near a lot of sites I needed to see. So what I used to do was I'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I would go out on my bike, and I'd plot a route that would take me through some of the places, and I could be back by I could be back by about 8:30, just in time to get croissants with the kids. And I'd have done 3.5 hours bike riding and been to a couple of 1 or 2 historical sites. So yeah, so I've been to, not all of them, but I've been to quite a few of the castles. And I mean, I actually got to go to the place where he died, which is called Chalut in 1199. Remarkably, the tower of the castle still stands almost entire. It's almost entire and contemporary with would have been there at the siege that he was undertaking when he got killed or injured and then killed. So I know the countryside. I mean, it definitely helped me write the book. Yeah, there were a couple of scenes where I was picturing where I'd been or whatever. It's funny, I'm never wholly sure. I don't know what you feel about this. I'm never wholly sure that visiting a site is a really good idea, because I don't take extensive notes, but in my head, I think it's a good thing. And my wife always says to me, if you think it's helping, then it must be feeding into the book. I don't know, what do you think?
Well, I find it's rather easy because I can just go to Wexford. It's not, it's a couple of 4 hours away, I think 4 or 5 hours away. So it's not exactly a huge enterprise to go to Wexford for me or whatever. But there are certain times when somebody will chime back into you and say, "You did it, you got it, that was Wexford." And I think that's probably the best thing that you can, if you've got that the flavor of the place, or you've noticed something that only a local will see. I think it's definitely worth it, and it comes across. I'm sure you've heard it when you've been talking about, for instance, in Clash of Empires, about that region of Greece. And people, I would imagine anybody who's visited there could almost smell it off the pages. Greece from there.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. If readers, if they get that feeling, I always say, especially with the Roman books, like we can't really know what it was like. You can only do your best, but there are so many holes in our knowledge. It's only ever an educated sort of opinion.
Yeah.
But if you can create the idea in a reader's head that they're there, and you've done good research, then your job's done, because you can't be accurate because we don't have video footage.
Well, you've got those paintings on the walls, and
yeah. Unfortunately, not very many of them.
Well, this is it. Yeah. I was thinking. Obviously, you were saying about the siege work and Richard being this person we often is probably name checked right up there with some of the great military minds of the age. Is there anything? I hesitate to ask this, but when does the Lionheart end and Crusade begin? Is there a time frame in there? Or is it?
Of course, yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, good question. Because as viewers will probably realize, I'll just keep talking. So it's thank you for reining me in. It comes to an end in 1189 there's a tumultuous, eventually civil war between Richard and his father. Richard eventually had enough of being waiting to be named heir. His father refused, and so he went off and joined forces with Philippe Capet, who is the arch enemy, really, of the English throne, but was a very Machiavellian figure who was good at making promises and being friendly. And so they actually invaded King Henry's lands, and there was a fight. There were battles and sieges, and eventually the old king had to give in to Richard, and he died soon after. They were never reconciled, or nominally reconciled. But I won't say the quote, but the thing that Henry was supposed to have said in Richard's ear as he was forced to accept peace was just gold. And then, more or less, but better than that. And then, so the book ends with his coronation in September 1189 in Westminster Abbey, which I must go to when things open up again, because I haven't been for years, and it would be great just to stand in it, because it's a pretty amazing place for the number of people that have been crowned there.
Yeah, so and I would presume his Richard. No, he's buried elsewhere. Never mind. But
he's in Fontevraud. He's in Fontevraud in the Abbey. Yeah, so I went there. That was another place I went last summer. He's buried there with his mother and with King John. No, not King
Oh,
John.
his
King
sister.
John's wife is there. Richard is there, and his not Berengaria. His wife's not there, but it's Richard,
Henry,
his mother,
his father, yeah.
his father,
Yeah.
and John's wife for some bizarre reason. Yeah, but it's pretty cool. Their bodies aren't in the tombs anymore because they're in the French Revolution. They just, they trashed everything like that, but they didn't destroy the actual tombs, and there's still original paint and everything on them, which is extraordinary.
It's
Yeah,
absolutely extraordinary. And again, yeah, we're just looking at this and we're thinking these wonderful names. I mean, you just rhyme them off there without even, Bad King John, and it really is a period, I think, which people just will never get tired of hearing about. It's such a evocative period of, crusading and fighting and family feuds and more F words, I'm sure. But what I mean, when we come to the end of the novel, obviously you've already sort of said that we've got another one coming. But where do we find Richard at the end? Is he ready to go on to do another adventure, or where is he at the end?
Yeah, he'd actually signed up to he'd taken the cross, as they called it, in 1187. So after the Battle of Hattin, when the message got to Europe, there was widespread sort of anger and hysteria, and he signed up. But 2 years late, almost 2 years later, so it was October 1187 was Hattin. By September 1189, he'd only just become king, and although he wanted, it's like when you get married and you have kids, you can't just put your backpack on and go off back, a 6-month trip. He had all these responsibilities. He didn't have a wife yet or kids, but he had this kingdom, and he couldn't just walk away. And he also had to sort things out with Philippe Capet, the French king. So it took him almost a year, well, about 9 months. So the beginning of the second book is the lead up to departure from France. So he and the French king departed together from the south of France in June 1190. But it took them almost a year to get to Israel. So, I was feeling really bad at the beginning. Like, I really want to write about the Siege of Acre and the battles with Saladin. And I was going, but there's all this amazing stuff that happened on Sicily. And then there's all this amazing stuff that happened on Cyprus. It's just, yeah. Like, I'll give away one line. When there was an emperor, a self-styled emperor of Cyprus called Isaac Comnenus, who was basically a con man who'd managed to seize power. And Richard took all of 15 days to defeat everybody in Cyprus, which was
claimed
very well.
The
whole island. Yeah, and when he took Isaac prisoner, you treated your noble prisoners well. And so Isaac said, please don't put me in fetters of iron. But Richard was really pissed off with him because of the things that had happened, which I won't mention. And so he said, sure, no problem. No fetters of iron for you. Make him some silver chains. And he had him chained in silver.
comedy master as well. That's Richard the Lionheart.
Yeah. Not without a sense of irony.
No, it's such a good story. And again, it's you've got another 10 years to work within Crusade. That bodes well. But Lionheart itself is these early years of Richard the Lionheart when he's fighting with everybody. And I presume he was, as you were saying, he was rather disliked in Aquitaine and having to overcome that by battles and sieges mostly. And it's a
and a lot of those men, a lot of those noblemen then ended up on the crusade with him. So when I was writing Lionheart, I had to keep going forward into the crusade to see, which guys were there and what did they do, because they needed to be characters in the first book if they're going to be characters in the second book, and they were his subjects. So he'd been fighting with them and subjugating them, and then they'd rebel again. Years in Aquitaine, and then they all went off to Israel together, and he was their leader. It was just, in fact, Jerusalem, Guy de Lusignan, his brother Geoffrey, was one of the most troublesome nobles that Richard had to deal with, and he was there in Outremer, which is Israel, saying, "Yeah, my brother should be king," and Richard's looking at him going, "And I'm supporting you."
I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes, I think you said it before that people from the past, they just aren't like us, and it's quite difficult to get your head around that kind of two-facedness, perhaps. But it happens again and again and again, and particularly with the Normans, they beat in the crap out of each other one day, and then they're standing side by side in the shield wall the next. They're fascinating people, I find. But yes, the Plantagenets are a hell of a heady mix, I'm sure.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, it's funny. I could see, obviously books I could have written before this one, and books I could write after it, and who knows where I'll go. I'm only definitely doing a trilogy on Richard, and then I want to write a standalone novel. But I was just saying before the interview, with all the events that have been cancelled and the books are going really well, I'm about 2 months ahead of myself to normally be on writing a book. So it's possible I could actually write 2 books this year. So what I logically think I might do is I'll maybe write the third Lionheart one, because it's all in my head right now. Why walk away from it for 6 months?
Yeah.
But if I finish Lionheart 3, working title doesn't have one. I need suggestions. Something like captive, something like prisoner. That's a one-word
yeah.
title.
Ransom.
Ransom, maybe, yeah. But yeah, if I finish that by the end of 2020, I don't actually have to hand that in until 2022. So I would have a whole calendar year to write another book.
Oh, yeah.
And I've got this one standalone, which is a totally different time period again, that I really want to write. I don't know, or a gladiator one, a Roman gladiator one. Oh, you must have millions of ideas.
So many ideas, and it's getting them onto paper is well, you don't seem to have a problem with this, but I can't wait to see this. 28th is only a few days away. I can't wait to get my hands on the novel. And I suppose what we should finish up with is sort of an indication of where, in these troubled times, where we should find our copies of these. Where's the best place to get them?
Oh, thank you for asking. Amazon is great. They are delayed. Emails went out today actually to people, so this is the 20th today. People won't get until the 2nd of June, and that's because they're not prioritizing books. But I'm lucky that they are stocking Lionheart. So lots of people may have noticed on Amazon, a lot of books are out of stock. They're not getting them stocked back in at the moment because their workers are too busy doing, sending out, I guess, packets of gloves and groceries and so on. But Amazon's good. Waterstones.com, because the bookshops aren't open yet, and it will also be in 500 Tesco's in the United Kingdom. So not quite every Tesco store, but nearly every Tesco store. And independents, Toppings of Bath, Goldsborough Books in London, they will have signed copies if anyone's interested. And if anyone wants a personally signed one, just contact me on Facebook, and I'll do that as well. So yeah. Thank you very much.
Listen, top man, we will, I'll drop all the details into the description when I put this on where all the channels that we put these things on. And hopefully people will pick up a copy of Lionheart, which is out on the 28th.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop recording.